the whole timeline on how this happened. South Troy Church has been here since, do you remember? 1856. I did. Okay. So 1856, but then in like 1999, the church closed, as many rural churches kind of struggle and get to that point. And over the next 10 years, the district just experimented with some different things. What do we do with this property? And I came on board in 2009. And in 2009, I didn't know anything about South Troy. I didn't know anything about the history, hence the phone call to Colleen. And the district had actually tried to give the property away a couple of times, only to have it given back, you know. And I gave a car to a guy once, and his daughters wouldn't drive it, and they gave it back. So, you know, it's kind of one of those kind of deals. And so we were at a district board meeting, and what do we do with South Troy? Do we try to sell the property? What do we do? And Dale Christensen, who's the pastor at our church in Austin, said, well, you know, Colleen and Gary live about 4 miles from there. And you had been driving back and forth to Austin, ministering there. And when were you ordained? 2012, okay. Yeah. So I got to ordain you too. Nice, or be part of that. And so anyway, so we began to experiment, and obviously, you know, the landscape had changed here. Rochester kept moving north. And anyway, here we are. We called Gary and Colleen and say, would you pray about maybe, would there be a possibility to start something new, something different in that area? And I remember you guys went around knocking on doors, and here you are. You know, and it's just been fantastic. I just rejoice with that. And then, of course, you added on the community room, which is just did a beautiful job with that. And anyway, congratulations. God's doing a work here, and I'm excited about that. So anyway, you're one of 100 and some churches across the Northwest District. I get to oversee about 32 of those churches in the states of Iowa and Minnesota. Well, I'll get to oversee them for about another 6 weeks. And then I'm going to be relocating closer to kids and grandkids. Honestly, I don't really like my kids that much, but you know, the grandchildren are worth it. Anyway, just one quick story. You know, God is alive and well, and culture would like you to believe that nobody's interested in God anymore, but that's just not true. It's just amazing. And just in the last year, we had, I'll just share one quick story. There's so many I could share. But one of our young pastors felt a call to plant a church in Mason City, Iowa. And he actually resigned his position at his church in Charles City, moved his family to Mason City, began to develop a core group. A pastor called me one day. He was the pastor of First Christian Church. And their church had been in decline. They were down to a handful of older people. And he said to me, we understand that we're on the verge of having to close our church, but we'd like to live on somehow. Would you come visit with us? We think if you'll take it, we think we'd like to give you our church building. And so the short of it is, we met with them. They were excited about our vision. The young pastor shared his vision for the church there. And they not only gave us their building, they said we've accumulated some funds over the years, and we'd like to make a financial commitment as well, which was good because this building needed some help, needed some. But anyway, in September of last year, I was there for the closing closing service of First Christian, and the launching of the new church, which is called One Church. And they handed over the deed to the property that day, along with a check for $200,000. Can you imagine such a thing? So anyway, one church launched the first Sunday of January, so that was just 5 months ago, and they launched with an attendance of 190, and they've just and they kind of settled in about 150, but they've been creeping up. They had 2 services on Easter Sunday. They had 240 on Easter, and already this baby church has baptized 27 believers. So those rumors you hear that nobody's interested in God, just write that off. We just have stories all over the place, and you have your own stories here. We're excited about that. Yeah.
And Brian Birch that helped here at South Troy, he used to attend New Life Church in Mason City, and he called me as well and said, would you tell him about that? So, and I thought,
Word's getting around,
yeah,
huh?
Isn't that cool? So.
That's very cool. That's very cool. See, Eric, you're not the only one she interrupted. I just want you to know that. So anyway, we got to talk about your control problem. No, I'm just joking. I'm joking. So let's talk about when the race gets hard. Anybody here, does life ever get hard? If your life never gets difficult, and you just live on easy street, you are free to leave now because you have nothing in common with me. But I think all of us would raise our hand and say sometimes the race gets really hard. Uses all kinds of analogies, metaphors to try to describe what the Christian life is like. Jesus talked about a tree and its fruit. He also talked about building on a firm foundation. You remember that parable he told about the wise man and the foolish man. One built his house on rock, one on sand. The Apostle Paul, in different places, though, uses an analogy that probably is my favorite. He uses the analogy of a race. And the Hebrew writer also uses that same analogy in Hebrews 12:1, and we'll pull that up on the screen. Therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Now, if I was going to preach on that passage, which I'm not, there's an easy 4-point outline. You can come back and do it later, okay? And the 4 points would be this race is important because people are watching. We're surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, and the way that you run your race affects not only you, but many, many other people. Second point would be if you're going to run this race, you got to throw off the stuff that's going to drag you down. Not just the sin, but just other entanglements. The third part would be that, and that's what we want to talk about today. This is a long race and it's a hard race. The Hebrew writer says that if you're going to run this race, you have to run it with what? What's the word? Perseverance. And then finally, you got to run the race marked out for you. That's point 4. You don't get to choose your own race. Jesus marks out the race for us. But we want to focus on that word perseverance and talk about the fact that this race, this discipleship that Jesus calls us to is not a sprint. It's a long race. And sometimes it gets hard. And sometimes, to use a runner's terminology, you find yourself hitting the wall. Any runners here? Nope. Maybe? Kind of, sort of, not serious. You pass those people running on the highway. Have you ever seen any of them smile? Anyway, so Dawn and I have 4 sons, and they all actually ended up in the Kansas City area, which is why we're moving to Kansas. And we're looking forward to being closer to kids and grandkids. But our youngest son, Luke, who's a counselor now and is 30, when he was a junior in high school, he came home and he announced to us that he was going to go out for cross country. Now, he was never serious about it. It was just a way to hang out with friends, But this was new to us. We were a family of basketball players. I knew nothing about cross country. but over the next couple of years, I learned about it. It's a 5-kilometer race, which I think is about 3.2 miles. It's run outdoors over an outdoor course. A lot of times they use golf courses for this. And so we went to our first cross-country meet, not knowing what to expect. Fortunately, we had friends whose son was a friend of our son, and they were experienced cross-country parents, and they took us under their wing. And so we were at the starting line, and they said, we'll show you what to do. We'll show you how to watch this race. Okay. And so the gun fired, and scores of boys took off like a shot. It was impressive. And for the first few hundred yards, they all looked like champions. Right? I mean, the first part of the race, pretty easy. So our friend said, okay, come with us, and we're going to go to a spot that's about halfway. And so at the halfway point, pretty soon, boys started running by, but they were no longer in a tight pack. Some were still running with strength. Some came eventually. You could tell they were hurting. You could tell the race was getting hard. And then so finally we went to the finish line. And at the finish line told the story. Okay? The finish line, it was easy to see who had trained, who had been disciplined, who had paid the price to be able to finish well. And so some of those boys, the first few runners ran with strength. They fought it out for first place. And others, by the time they crossed, I didn't know if we were going to have to call 911 or what. But that day I thought, and as I watched the cross-country meets, I actually learned a few things about life and leadership. But that day I made this mental note. And the mental note I made that day was this: how you start a race isn't nearly as important as how you finish it. Now, that's true in so many areas, right? I mean, the race, the cross-country race is just a metaphor. It's an analogy. But it's easy to start stuff. For instance, how about marriage? Anybody can have a great wedding. But a marriage, that's a hard race, isn't it? It's not hard to start well. It's like one guy said one day. He said, my wife and I, when we were first married, we were so happy. But then as we were leaving the church, okay, think about it. You'll get it. About 10 minutes from now, one of you is going to laugh at the wrong time because you'll just catch on. Physical health. It's always interesting to me for the first 2 weeks of January how full the parking lots are at the gyms. Because it's easy to start. Finances. I'm gonna start disciplining myself. I'm gonna quit living paycheck to paycheck. I'm gonna live on a budget. And then, man. And then you see that thing. Oh boy, I don't know. Ladies, you see that dress, and you say, "Oh, I'm not going to buy it. I'm just going to try it on." And you just think, "Oh man, I look good in this." And Satan whispers in your ear and tempts you, and you say, "Get thee behind me, Satan." And he says, "Looks great from back here." And you can think about that one too. Sorry, see none of those are in my notes. I need to quit doing that. I got to get back to my notes instead of freewheeling it. Obviously, if a church is to remain strong, there are seasons when it gets really hard, And obviously in our walk with Jesus, it's easy to start well. I accept Christ as my Savior, forgiveness of sin. I got this new life in Christ. It's going to be so awesome. And it gets hard, you know. So as we talk about some of these ideas, I want you to apply these truths to any area of life you need to, okay? Whether it's marriage that I mentioned, whether it's your walk with Jesus, and you just, boy, I just didn't think it'd be like this. I get discouraged. I didn't want to come to church today, quite honestly. There are a few of us senior citizens in this room. I'm discovering as a senior, it gets kind of hard. There are unique temptations that come with being a senior citizen. One of the ones that I battle is the temptation just to dial everything back, to quit learning, to quit growing, to quit serving, to say, you know what, somebody else can watch those kids. I did my turn. Those kinds of things. So you apply this wherever you need to. So today we're going to look at one of my heroes in Scripture. At the age of 40, he encountered something that made his race. I mean, it had not been easy up to that point, for sure. But something happened at about the age of 40 that made his race really, really, really hard. Like for the next 45 years, really hard. His name's Caleb. You can read the whole story in Numbers 13 and 14. Let's just review it, though, real quickly. You may remember that under the leadership of Moses, God delivered the children of Israel from slavery, from bondage in Egypt. They had been, if you remember the story, Joseph's family came there during a famine, and the nation grew, and anyway, for 400 years they'd been enslaved. And so God delivered them, the 10 plagues, that whole deal. And the party in the Red Sea, and leading them with a pillar of cloud by day and fire by night, and providing for them. And now finally, when we get to Numbers chapter 13, they're on the edge of the promised land. On the other side of the Jordan River is the long-awaited promised land. And they decided it'd be a good idea to send spies over there. Let's not just jump into this. Turns out they'd have been better off if they had just jumped into it. But let's spy this out, And so they selected 12 spies, one from each of the 12 tribes of Israel. And they went and they spied it out. They came back, even brought some of the fruit. And basically their report is that this land is even better than anything we imagined. It's just incredible. But there's a problem. This is going to be really hard. They have large fortified cities, and they even have giants over there. And I just don't, 10 of the spies said, I just don't think we should risk it. But Joshua and Caleb said, we have to. This is what God has called us to. So let's look at a passage in Numbers 14 and then go back to Joshua. So this is after the nation wimped out and said, you know what, maybe we should choose a leader and go back to Egypt. Okay. These are the words of God. As surely as I live, and as surely as the glory of the Lord fills the whole earth, not one of the men who saw my glory and the miraculous signs I performed in Egypt and in the desert, but who disobeyed me and tested me 10 times, not one of them will ever see the land I promised on oath to their forefathers. But no one who has treated me with contempt will ever see it. But because my servant, now watch this phrase, because my servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly, I'll bring him into the land he went to, and his descendants will inherit it. So I read that, and that phrase, my servant Caleb has a different spirit. grabbed me. And I thought, so what was different about this guy? What was it that set him apart from those 10 other losers? You know, what was it that got him through the whole 40-some years of traveling around in the wilderness until he finally was able to take possession of the land? And so I went back to the book of Joshua, and I just a few things just started rising to the surface for me. And to use the race analogy, these are the qualities I think he possessed that enabled him to keep running even when the race got hard. And boy, did it ever get hard. So you ready to do this? 5 things we want to talk about. We're going to begin with Joshua 14, 6 and 7, first part of verse 7. Now the men of Judah approached Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, said to him, "You know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, at Kadesh Barnea about you and me. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land." Okay, so we'll read in just a few minutes. He is now 85. So do the math. For 45 years, he had been wandering in the wilderness, waiting for that whole older, disobedient generation to die off. And now, 45 years later, a whole new young generation plus 2 old dudes go in and take possession of the land. 45 years, people. Now, that's not as long as you Vikings fans have waited for a Super Bowl championship, but that was not necessary. Sure was fun, though. 45 years. So, first quality I picked up on, if you're going to run the race, because remember, this is a long race, you're going to need the quality of patience. You're going to have to resist the temptation to count the score at halftime. You're going to have to be patient even when things are going tough, and remind yourself there's still a lot of race to run here. Okay? The jury's not in yet. God is not done yet. Caleb remembered a promise that God had made 4+ decades earlier. And he waited, and he waited, and he waited. Let's do a survey. Will you participate in a survey with me? How many of you like to wait? How many of you, like Eric, are liars? Yeah. Waiting is hard, isn't it? You know, boy. You ever find yourself thinking this, it wasn't supposed to be this way? Anybody? Yeah. And we find ourselves in a season, we find ourselves in a situation we can't fix. So we pray and we love and we wait. Right now, my wife and I are praying for a couple of our sons who are not following Jesus. We're really concerned about some of the choices they're making. But I can't fix it. And I hate that. So we pray and we love and we serve and we wait. And when God gives us opportunities, we point them to the truth they know with gentleness. I don't know what your situation is, your race that you're waiting. I don't know. But the fact of the matter is, we all face disappointments that put us in the waiting room. And this is really, really, really critical what we decide to do with those seasons. Because some people get better. Others just get what? Bitter. You know? The waiting for some people, they just seem to grow more resilient. You know? More loving, more patient. And other people, as they're in the waiting room, they turn into that get off my lawn guy. Grumpy. You know those people you cross the street to avoid? Have you met that guy? Are you that guy? I hope not. So, but here's the deal. The key to Caleb's patience, he never lost sight of the fact that the sovereign God made a promise. And I can't bring it to pass, but I can wait. And I can embrace hope because I know that God is at work even if I can't see it. He could have just shriveled up from the disappointment. Now here's something else. We don't have time to go into this. I'll just mention it really quick. But the situation he found himself in wasn't his fault. You know, sometimes I do stupid things and suffer the consequences, and I think, well, okay, I kind of had this coming. But in this case, it wasn't even his fault. It was these 10 other losers who weren't willing to be disobedient or willing to be obedient, and he got caught in the crossfire of their decisions. See? Anyway, so patience. You ready to go on? Okay, you got that one down? Score yourself a 10 out of 10 on patience. Verses 7 and 8, I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land. And I brought him back a report according to my convictions, but my brothers who went up with me made the hearts of the people melt in fear. I, however, followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. Those other guys, their hearts were melting with fear. I, however, followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. Courage is the next thing I see in him. Made him a man with a different spirit. Keying in the word convictions. I brought him back a report according to my convictions, not according to peer pressure, not according to popular opinion, not according to circumstances, according to my convictions. Andy Stanley defined courage like this. I love this definition so much. Clarity around an unreasonable commitment to what should be. Clarity around an unreasonable commitment to what should be. First of all, Caleb had clarity. He knew that the plan of God was for them to be on the other side of the Jordan, not this side. He had clarity. God has promised me this land. We're going to take this land. Listen, you cannot have courage without clarity. But then there's that unreasonable commitment part. I love this. 10 of the spies were saying, Caleb, Joshua, be reasonable. They're giants. We can't do this. Here's the thing. I want you to hear me well. The farther we are into the race, the easier it becomes to play it safe. We start thinking about conserving what we have instead of expanding into new territories. We start being overly cautious. We don't want to risk. Now, if you think about it, that's exactly what churches do. 15 years ago, there was nothing here but this part of the building, and it was pretty crummy. Can I say that? Okay. You didn't have a congregation, you know. It wasn't hard to risk. There was nothing to risk. Right? You know? I was texting with a couple of my sons, and I won't go into details on what it was about, but it involved NBA playoffs. And one of them suggested that the best financial decision was to bet life savings on a team that, you know, didn't stand a chance. And one of them asked me, "Who are you going to bet your life savings on, Dad?" And I said, "Nobody. Because unlike you two, I actually have a life savings. You guys got nothing. Not yet. But yeah, it's not hard to risk when you got nothing. But I think one of the keys to continuing to run is to have the courage to try new things. For churches to develop new ministries. To not be afraid to risk. But what if some people don't like it? I don't know, maybe God likes it. Anyway, so whether we're talking about people or churches or businesses or organizations, change is always a key to continued growth. Change always involves risk, and risk always takes courage. Okay, I'm going to say that again. Change is always a key to growth. Change always involves risk, and risk always involves courage. So, this Caleb, this 85-year-old dude, patience, but also courage. Let's go on. So on that day, Moses swore to me, the land on which your feet have walked will be your inheritance and that of your children forever, because you have followed the Lord your God wholeheartedly. So wholehearted commitment is the next thing I see in him. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. The longer I've run my race, the more I realize, to use the words of the Hebrew writer, I have to throw off the stuff that entangles. You know, back to that cross-country race, it wasn't hard to see which boys were committed and which boys, like my son, were just there to hang out with their friends. One important key to running this race is to understand what's important and be committed to that. Half-hearted commitment will not cut it. It will not win the race. You know, one of the things I've noticed as I have aged, I'm 69 now, older than some of you, not as old as some of you. But it's not the years, it's the miles, right? I've noticed that there are fewer things in my life that I consider to be really important. Not more. When I was young, I would have argued about a lot of stuff. Just so convinced that I was right on a lot of that stuff. When I was younger, I think I tried to be committed to too many things. But these days, for me, first, foremost, and always, Jesus. Trying to really understand who Jesus is, who he was, and walking in his steps. My marriage, my family, the church, lost people. Boy, after that, what else is really important? You know? Wholehearted commitment. If you don't understand what's important and give yourself wholeheartedly to those things, you will not run the race well. All right, let's do two more real fast. Or maybe not that fast. Verse 10, now then, just as the Lord promised, he's kept me alive for 45 years since the time he said this to Moses, while Israel moved about in the desert. So here I am today, 85 years old. The fourth quality I see in him is unwavering faith. God made a promise to Caleb, and he never lost sight of it. Did you notice how many times Caleb refers to the Lord's promise? Just as the Lord's, he never doubted that God would keep his word. He never doubted the end of the story. Boy, we struggle with that, don't we? The end of the story. You ever watch a football or basketball game that you had pre-recorded? Anybody ever do that? No? I've done that. Especially during NFL season, I'm always driving home from somewhere. And so, my team's the Broncos, by the way. If they're going to be on, and they're never on anymore because they haven't been any good. But anyway, I'll record it so I can watch it later when I get home. And often one of my boys will text me or something and give me the outcome of the game, which kind of ruins it, right? But if the Broncos won, I'll go ahead and watch it. And it was interesting. It occurred to me one day how much more relaxed I am when I know the outcome of the game. It's kind of like my team fumbles. If I was watching it live, I'd be screaming at the television. But if I'm watching it and I know my team wins in the end, it's just kind of like, whatever. The Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord, And listen, the end of the story. Caleb never doubted the end of the story. And you don't have to either. Because we serve a faithful God. Let's do one more. Verses 11 and 12. I'm still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm still as vigorous to go out to battle now as I was then. Now give me this hill country the Lord promised me that day. You yourself heard then that the Anakites were there and their cities were large and fortified. But the Lord helping me, I'll drive them out, just as he said. The last thing I love about Caleb is this forward-thinking attitude. At 85, he was spending more time looking through the windshield than he did at the rearview mirror. At 85, he was not talking about the good old days all the time. At 85, he still had dreams. At 85, he still had stuff he wanted to accomplish. And I love that. I think he's kidding himself a little bit, by the way, when he says, I'm just as vigorous, I'm still as strong today. I doubt it. I mean, he could have been really fit for an 85-year-old, but he probably was not. But listen, he was in this regard. The strength was in his spirit. And it was I wish I had time to talk about this. There was something in his spirit that the young warriors could pick up on. He made the young warriors better. See? So those are 5 things I see in Caleb that made him a man with a different spirit. Let's go back to our Hebrews passage and read a couple more verses, and then we're going to wrap it up. Therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Now, here it is. Let us fix our eyes on who? Jesus. Always Jesus. Not people, not churches, not your own strength, not your problems. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Remind yourself that I wouldn't even be in the race if Jesus hadn't finished his race. Fix your eyes on Jesus so that you'll not grow weary and lose heart. There it is. There it is. Always Jesus. But because my servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly, I'll bring him into the land he went to, and his descendants will inherit it. My friends, regardless of your age, regardless of your station in life, may God give you a different spirit so that you'll run your race well